Into DawgsCentral live on a Monday night. I am Graham Coffey. I am rolling solo this evening, second time in a row. So be patient, bear with me. We'll do the best that I can to get to all of your questions. I've got a lot of your subscriber questions from the DawgsCentral forum loaded up and ready to go. And I will keep an eye on the chat as well to see what pops in there. Hope everybody has had a good weekend. If you were off for the holiday, hope you had a good long weekend. And if you're getting off work on a Monday, I hope your work week got off to a nice start. I have been kind of decompressing, sort of recapping, going back over notes and videos from my time out at Elite 11 in California. I was out there for all 3 days of the event last week, out there in Redondo Beach in the LA area. Very interesting experience. Got to spend a lot of time around Georgia commits Dylan Raiola and Ryan Puglisi, see how they stack up against each other, see how they stacked up to the other 18 quarterbacks that were out there from this class, and also get to know those guys pretty well, actually. Lots of time, lots of downtime between drills for them, and lots of opportunities to just chat and kind of talk. Did some on the record interviews, but also just lots of good casual off the record conversations. And I think Georgia fans are going to be really, really excited as they get to know both those young guys better. Two very, very good players, but also just really good people. And I think you guys will enjoy their time in Athens over the coming years. So kind of, going back through, before I get into some questions and stuff, wanted to share a little bit about what we saw. And sorry, Craig, yes, I am late. I apologize. We had a little, some Wi-Fi issues over here at my office, which I jokingly call DawgsCentral World Headquarters. But Elite 11 recap. Raiola did not win the MVP of the event. That went to Julian Sayin. I think it's worth noting that Elite 11's kind of scoring system is a bit ambiguous. It's kind of a black box in the sense that, like, we don't exactly know how much they weigh everything. We do know that they weigh your junior year tape as like half of your score, which is, again, very ambiguous in terms of how you judge tape. Are you what are you looking for exactly? Where are you putting grading emphasis? I did kind of my own recap in some rankings that I posted up on Twitter and on DawgsCentral, first in the subscribers forum, but there's also a free article up now that I posted after a couple days. So if you want to check those out, I'm very much more interested in, if I was an offensive coordinator, which player would give me the most amount of scheme flexibility. Like, Michael Penix was there, right? Washington quarterback, played at Indiana, transferred to Washington, had a phenomenal season last year, really good year. And I got to watch him throw a little bit. And it was interesting watching him throw because Penix is kind of like a guy that, like, he's like a pitcher that has like one really good pitch, not a lot of breaking stuff, but a high heat, very, very like high 90s fastball that he throws for strikes very regularly. And like with Penix, I think Washington and Kalen DeBoer did a really good job of like organizing the entire offense around fastball throws. So all these players, not all, but a lot out there, like, they can have productive college careers if their coordinator, where they end up, designs the offense to their strengths. And that's going to be true for any quarterback, right? Like every quarterback's going to have strengths and weaknesses. But what I'm interested in is who has the most ability to make all the throws. Like who is going to be the guy that gives me, if I was a play caller in an alternate universe, the chance to just never have to put red marks through any call on my play sheet, right? And that guy's Raiola, like it is. He's the number one player in the country for a reason. I know that Julian's saying the Alabama commit won MVP, but Raiola can make all the throws. He can roll left and not break stride and still, hit a crossing route to the left sideline. He can, he can throw the deep ball, and his deep balls are just different than every other player that was there. Even gathering the best high school quarterbacks from this class together, when you watch Raiola throw deep, there is a drive on the ball and there is an ease of which he throws that is just on another level from all the other guys that we got the chance to watch this week. You saw some of these guys who were really accurate underneath and then not so accurate with the deep ball throws, or vice versa, right? And Raiola, I think is pretty accurate on all levels of the field. He's capable of making all the throws, but what really stood out for me is just his ball placement. He, even when he's throwing to an open guy in a workout, or throwing to like an open receiver in his 7-on-7 session, you saw him put balls where only his guy would be able to catch it if this was like a real football situation. And there were some 7-on-7 throws he made where they were in tight coverage. He had a touchdown pass that was dropped that was like a seam route, and he basically threw it to where it was probably going to hit the crossbar of the goalpost if the receiver didn't go up and put his hands on it. And yeah, he just makes those types of plays where he sees the field in 3 dimensions. And I know that's kind of a weird thing to say, but if you followed this show or you've read my work for, going back to last football season or the one prior, I talk about this a lot. Like there's a lot of college quarterbacks who they only see things 2-dimensionally. And like, if there's not an open lane in front of them for a receiver, then they don't think that guy is opened. And Raiola has this processing ability where he understands how to use trajectory and how to fit a ball between a safety and a linebacker, and where to put the ball to basically throw a guy open instead of having to wait and see that guy open and then release the throw. And that's the difference between the great quarterbacks and everyone else. It's not arm strength or height necessarily, or any of that other stuff. It is the like creativity and processing ability, at least in my personal opinion, to look at a guy who 80% of quarterbacks see as covered and see a place to put that throw where it's not dangerous, where your OC is not going to yell at you. And Raiola, in my opinion, watching all of the drills, but particularly watching the 7-on-7 periods, because every quarterback had a 7-on-7 period on Friday, his ability to see that stuff is just head and shoulders above everybody else. And it's not just that he sees it, it's that he sees it quickly and he anticipates it, and the ball is kind of out of his hand before you realize that the player is open. And so I think if you're a Georgia fan, which you probably are if you're watching this show, or most of you probably are, that's what's to be excited about with Raiola. Looking at some other notes that I have, like what was interesting for me and why I wanted to see him in that setting, and why, I felt like it was worth my time to go out there, is you're talking about a kid who's the number one, not just the number one quarterback in the class, but the number one overall player in the country with Dylan Raiola. And even at his young age, everybody wants to tear him down. A lot of other fan bases that don't like Georgia and the successes Georgia is having, they're looking for reasons to say that Dylan Raiola is overrated. And he had times where, he saw some adversity. Day 2 was kind of the pro day workout session. He came in a tie for third. Again, some of the scoring on that was a little ambiguous. You didn't see very many balls hit the ground at all during his workout, and most of the receivers he was throwing to were not guys that I would call future Power 5 starters. Still scored well, but he didn't win, and he's a kid who's used to winning, right? And then day 3, they had an accuracy kind of target challenge where they set up stationary targets, and he struggled during that. He did. He missed a couple throws, and then he got frustrated, and he started aiming the ball, and that is a drill where the guys that just sat back and ripped it were the ones who had the most success. And so with Raiola, you saw him kind of get tight and you saw him get frustrated. And I was like, well, how's he going to bounce back with this? How is he going to respond in his 7-on-7? Because the 7-on-7 is honestly, of everything that those guys do out there during the week, that's the closest thing that we see to actual football. That's the closest thing that we're going to watch to, find out how does this guy do in real live situations with real defenders. And he went out and he had the best 7-on-7 period of anybody. I think he was 13 of 16 for 4 touchdowns. One of those 3 incompletions was a drop touchdown pass. That drop touchdown pass might have been his best throw of the entire 7-on-7 session. And, the receiver drops it, and the next down basically was third down, which in 7-on-7 is 4th down. But if you don't convert on third down, then you turn the ball over, you start the possession over. So it was like, well, how's he going to bounce back? Is he going to allow this to go into this third down throw, and he's not going to, convert a touchdown on this possession? No, he threw a touchdown on the next play. And that was the thing that I wanted to see from him, because the good ones, they've got short memories. I was talking to somebody that was there who is a quarterback coach for a lot of big names. He's been a quarterback coach for guys who have won Super Bowls. And he and I were kind of talking about the scoring system with Elite 11 and what is that emphasizing. And, he basically said, he was like, when we get to the point where we're valuing target practice and, stationary drills over throwing to actual receivers and doing actual football activities, then we're kind of losing our way. But his opinion on Raiola was very much the one that I just shared, where he was like, the great ones, they go out and they have a bad drive, or they have a bad quarter, or they have a bad half, and they lock back in for the moments that really matter. Was he playing in an SEC championship? Was he playing in a national championship? No. But all of the eyes, all the spotlight is on him. The expectations for him are as high as we've seen for any quarterback in a while. And he showed up out there, and I thought, the talent was absolutely obvious, but more so the mental toughness, I think, was better than maybe what I would have expected. And I think that's promising for him in terms of his ability to maybe play early at Georgia and play well early. And I think with Raiola, what is interesting is just that processing ability I was talking about earlier. That's the type of thing that guys watch film with their OCs and quarterback coaches for an entire college career sometimes, and they never get. And, there's a lot of 5-star quarterbacks who don't pan out. Over half of them don't pan out. He is one that I think is going to pan out just because you see the processing ability. And I think that is what Georgia is getting, aside from like the sexy throws and the big deep balls and the throws that he makes on the run or while he's being hit that are accurate and well placed. You've got a guy that sees the field really well, and I think that's the most important thing. So a lot to be excited about for all of the Georgia fans out there. And I think there's I believe and know there is a lot to be excited about with Ryan Puglisi as well. Really, really mature kid, really, really interesting kid. My biggest takeaway on Puglisi is that he is a lot bigger than I think a lot of folks realize. Like, he's a legit 6'3" plus, might be more like 6'4". Broad shouldered, like run the ball up the middle in the SEC on zone reads, kind of broad shouldered, and you're not worried about him getting hurt. There were players at Elite 11 who finished higher in certain drills and certain standings and on different recruiting services lists because of how they performed in some of these like camp style drills that will probably never have a chance of seeing an NFL field because they don't have the requisite arm strength and physical tools. Puglisi's got a huge arm. I mean, like when he sits back and hums it, it's big. I mean, the kid's been clocked 94 miles an hour on the baseball diamond. Like, MLB scouts want him to come to, top 50 prospect type events because they're interested in drafting him. Like, he is, he's legit from an arm strength standpoint. And I think what was interesting was him and Raiola's interactions were all very, friendly. And after night one, I kind of asked him, I was like, how's this going between you guys? And he was like, yeah, it's the first time we met, and people expect us to like hate each other or something, but we're teammates out there, and we're pulling for each other, and we're cheering each other on. And that's something that sounds really nice, right? Like it's the right answer. But in this case, it was also the true answer. That was very easy to see. You could watch them and their interactions and see them high-fiving. You could see them smiling. You could see them chatting in a relaxed manner. It seems like those guys both respect one another's talent. And the other thing too, truthfully, like, I think Puglisi is extremely physically talented, but he's a rawer prospect. Like, there is a lot of stuff in his game that's going to need time. It's going to need polishing. There's things that have to get done for him. Like, he's got some growth to do. The 7-on-7 event for him didn't go great, which isn't a super surprise because he's never played 7-on-7. But that processing stuff that I'm talking about earlier with Raiola, Puglisi doesn't have all of that, not yet. And I think he will. I think he can, but like, he's just not as ready to show up on a campus and compete for the starting job day one. And so I truthfully think like this thing with both of them being in the same class and all of that, there's a universe where Dylan Raiola starts for 2 years at Georgia and goes to the NFL as the number one overall draft pick. And then Ryan Puglisi starts for 2 years at Georgia and goes to the NFL as a high round draft pick as well. Like, both those guys can have successful careers at Georgia without really getting in each other's way, just because they're on different developmental curves. And that's not to discount Ryan at all, because I think he's a tremendous talent. I think he's a very mature kid. I just think like there's stuff in his game from an accuracy standpoint and from a release consistency standpoint that he'll have to work on a little bit harder to get ready to to play big boy football in the SEC. But I think Georgia should be excited for both of them. Harry asked if I think we'll see Puglisi redshirt. You never know, but that would be my assumption right now. I mean, I think that would be likely, and I think it makes sense to put a year of eligibility between him and Raiola as well. And I think that Puglisi is the type of kid, like, he wants to play for Georgia. Okay, like that dude wants to play for Georgia. His dad walked around all week with a Georgia hat on. Like, he is coming to Georgia, and anytime a coach hits him up, like, he puts the brakes on that. He's a one official visit type of kid. So point being in all of that, like, I don't think he's coming into the college experience with a bunch of conditions that he's trying to force onto a coaching staff of, like, when he's going to play and all of that. I think that he's coming to Georgia to get developed and play for Georgia, and that he's going to be there for the long haul. If him and Raiola compete for the job next offseason, and he's the number 2 or number 3 guy, I don't think he's transferring out the next spring. I could be wrong. I mean, I totally could be wrong in the portal era. Who knows? But it's just, he's a little bit different. He is not just a little bit different. He is very different than most of your modern recruits. He's not really, like, worried about being wined and dined and romanced. He wants to play for Georgia, and he thinks that's the best place for him. And so I don't think that's going to change just because, he doesn't get on the field immediately when he shows up on campus. Moving along, if there's any other guys that you all have questions about, I do have notes. Lagway was interesting, the Florida commit. And Georgia fans are always interested in what's going on with Florida. Lagway, bigger than I thought, and I thought he was big. Like, dude is built like an all SEC running back. Really, really muscular, broad-shouldered kid. The stationary drills, he was a better passer than I thought he would be. Did a good job of, consistently hitting guys that were, 10, 15, 20 yards away that were standing still. Not as good with the, with basically throwing to guys in stride, throwing to receivers who are running routes. Not a good 7-on-7 session for him. Think he's really talented. I worry for him that he's going to go to Florida, and they're going to basically need him to start right away in 2024, and they're going to kind of throw him out there, and they're going to sort of, like, break him a little bit in terms of just not giving him the development and confidence that he needs. Because I think that he's a guy that, physically he's so mature. You want to put him out there, especially because what he can do when plays break down. But, I think he would benefit from going somewhere that has an established starter and waiting a year or two. I also think that I know that Florida's been on a hot recruiting roll for the last 24, 48 hours ever since the quarterback flipped to Ole Miss. Napier's doing a good job of trying to control the PR here, but that team's got a lot of rebuilding to do. They got a lot of stuff to figure out, and that 2024 schedule that they have is going to be brutal. And yeah, I hope it works out well for Lagway. Other guys I would keep an eye on, Colin Hurley, LSU commit, was playing a year up. Younger kid, reclassified. He's got some alpha dog vibes. Big arm, big kid, kind of quieter, but really toolsy prospect. I think he's going to be good. I think Brian Kelly will be able to get a lot out of him. And then Will Hammond, Texas Tech commit, currently is the 29th ranked quarterback in the class in all the composite rankings. But, like, I thought he was one of the 5 best players there this week. So Texas Tech is getting a good steal with him. And I wouldn't be shocked if some bigger programs try to make a run at him here late in the cycle. All right, let's get to some questions. If you got some questions for me that you didn't put into the DawgsCentral forum, throw them in the chat, see what I can do with them. I'm going to throw kind of both of these questions together. One is from Boise Dog. One is from William O. Asking about thoughts on defensive line / offensive line recruiting, sort of how I see those classes coming together. I think Georgia's offensive line recruiting is in a good place. I know there's like always the concern. There's kind of the perception that Cyril's is not a dude that signs like the big 5-star studs, and I think that's fair. That's a fair perception or criticism to a certain extent. I also think when you evaluate Georgia's offensive line recruiting, the first thing that you need to remember is that what Georgia's doing with their run schemes is very, very unique, and it's almost singular in college football in that they're running gap scheme and zone scheme about 50-50. And most teams are 80-20, one or the other. So Georgia is looking at offensive line prospects, and they're looking for a wider set of tools than they were when Sam Pittman was around. Now, they need an offensive lineman that can pull and that can come around the end of the line and clean out a linebacker to set the edge for a running back, or that can get to the second level in a way that some of the guys they had early in Kirby's era couldn't. Early in Kirby's era, there was all this emphasis on we got to get bigger up front. We got to get bigger up front. We're too small. And it was almost like the pendulum swing too far in that direction. And you saw in 2019 what happened. James Coley called zone draws on almost 25% of all play calls that season. And Georgia, they couldn't run the ball when people knew they were going to run the ball. And that's kind of like one of the hardest things to do in football is to run the ball when everybody knows it's coming. And so that gap scheme that they started to install into the offense when they hired Matt Luke, like that has worked as a release valve for Georgia in some big moments the last couple of years. And it's something that, I think is important to them to make sure they continue doing. And so point being, you're not trying to recruit the Isaiah Wilson, Ben Cleveland type guys anymore that are just massive, 330, 340, 350 kind of size dudes. Like you want guys that are still 300 pounds, but that, have good ankles and have good mobility. And so I think Georgia's offensive line board, I know Georgia's offensive line board is going to look a lot different than the recruiting rankings that you look at, just because what they want and need is going to be a lot different than what everyone else wants. But as far as this class right now, if you are a DawgsCentral subscriber, you know that I feel good about where Georgia stands with Daniel Calhoun. I think that is trending positively for them. And I saw some angst on the internet today when Marquise Easley, the offensive tackle prospect out of Illinois, I believe Kanaki, Illinois. That's a fun word to say. He put out a top 3 today, and Georgia wasn't on that, which was a surprise to many because he was on Georgia's campus for their first big official visit weekend in June. And, he's a big kid. He's 6'5.5", 355 pounds. He's a top 200-ish player in the country. And and lots of people thought Georgia was going to get him. And then all of a sudden, it's like, well, why isn't Georgia in his top three? How do I say this? I wouldn't be worried about Easley. I wouldn't put much stock in that top three. Is how I'll put that for now. I think Georgia's still very, very, very much involved there, and yeah, just we'll leave it at that. As far as the defensive line, Boise Dog kind of asks about that, and one of you asked about Justin Scott already. Let's see. I personally believe that Georgia's defensive line recruiting is never going to be something that I get concerned about, as long as Trey Scott and Kirby Smart are around. Right now, you've got Joseph Jonah Ajane, I believe is how you say his name. JJA is how I've been referring to him. Texas kid, Oak Ridge, Conroe, Texas. He's about 6'4", 270. He's more of that classic 4-eye defensive end. Think Trevon Walker, think Michael Williams type prospect. I expect Georgia to sign him. I expect him to be committed to Georgia in the near future, unless something changes. Always give the caveat that we're dealing with these teenagers and things change quickly, but I like where Georgia stands with him. I think the big question, and it's a fair question, is like where is Georgia going to be with some of these really big interior line prospects? And we talk about this on this show a lot, right? Like those are the guys that are that make elite programs elite. There's a ton of good receivers running around. There's tons of good running backs running around. There's not many 300 plus, 280 plus pound defensive linemen that can run 4.5, 4.6, 4.7, and 2 gap. And that's what Georgia's done a really good job of getting their hands on in recent years. And that's what they got to continue doing a good job of to stay where they want to be, right? So I think you've got like 4. Let's assume that Jonah Ajane comes and is part of the class, and then you got 4 like 5-star-ish type players that are still on your board. In Aiden Vreeland, who was just on campus this weekend, Matter Day kid. Some people think he's the best defensive tackle in the country. You've got Edric Houston, who's a Buford kid, who I think right now is trending out of state, maybe to Ohio State. You got Justin Scott, who's an Illinois kid. And then you got Williams Nwaneri, who is out of Missouri. And everyone thinks he's going to Oklahoma. I'll put it this way. I would be surprised. So first of all, with Scott, him and Easley, the offensive tackle we were talking about a moment ago, like those guys are tight. They're both from Illinois. They were on their visits together. I think there's a good chance that those two big guys end up playing together in college. I'm not saying they're a package deal because I don't think they are, but I think they'd like to play together in college. And I feel like there's a good chance that happens at Georgia. I think Scott is very, very much in play and on the table for UGA. Also, you're talking about a 5-star defensive tackle. Any smart program that's well run, like that's where they're throwing their NIL money. And so it's kind of like the Damon Wilson recruitment last year, right? Like there's going to be some twists and turns in terms of, someone is going to probably come and make a big upfront money promise or something like that. Point being, it's just hard. It's always been hard to predict some of these recruitments, but now that there's NIL involved, like these things can change at the 11th hour, and they often do all the time. But I feel really good about where Georgia is with Scott, and I also feel very where Georgia is with Nwaneri, Williams Nwaneri. I think people think he's more like trending towards Oklahoma. And that's one of those where I think Georgia has done a better job than a lot of people realize. Not saying he's coming to Georgia, but I guess what I am saying is between Nwaneri, Scott, Freeland, I think Georgia gets at least one, and it wouldn't shock me if they ended up with two. Honestly, that's just a spot, like that's a position that Kirby Smart recruits harder than anywhere else, and Georgia's going to recruit those guys hard, and so we'll see how that ends up in the long run. But I think Georgia's in a better place than a lot of those guys than people realize. Edge recruiting. That's an interesting spot right now, honestly, for UGA, just because I'm not sure where exactly things are going there. I think Georgia, with some of the linebackers they're in on, I think there is a chance where they could maybe kind of see some of those guys as possible to move over. They also have just signed a couple of really good edge classes in a row, so I don't blame any high level player for not necessarily like wanting to come to UGA, but Jason does a really good job, obviously on DawgsCentral, and he's very plugged in with recruiting in the state of Alabama, and he feels like Georgia's in a better place than I think a lot of people realize with Jordan Ross. He feels like that's a kid that's still in play for UGA in a way that maybe some don't believe. And Georgia is coming off back-to-back national championships. They're the premier program in college football right now. So, like any big name prospect, there's always going to be some smoke with kind of, or not necessarily always, but like there's always going to be a chance that they can land somebody. And I keep being told by people that I trust and that have been right for me a long time and are very good sources that like there's a couple big surprises still on the board for Georgia in this class that will be, kind of like, 5-star type surprises, big movers and shakers. And so point being is that I continue to just kind of keep an eye on Dylan Stewart and see what's going on there. I'm not saying it's happening, but I'm just saying, there's the visits that happen, and then there's everything else that happens. And a lot of times, the visits are the only thing that gets written about or published about or whatever. But there's a lot of other things that go on to these relationships and recruiting. So I don't know. We'll keep an eye on it. I hope that answers the question thoroughly. Let's move on. David J asked, would UGA be recruiting wide receivers better if Monken was still on staff? My personal belief is no. I don't think UGA is really struggling in their wide receiver recruiting. Look, everybody wants Jeremiah Smith for good reason. He's a stud. He's a good player. He's a really good player. I don't know what that kid's going to do. Okay. Like I'm not, I don't know. He's all over the map right now. And that recruitment it's going to continue to be interesting and dramatic. And we'll see how it goes. Nikar is one of the 10 best receivers in this class. Without a doubt, in my opinion. He's a really good player that Georgia got. Ryan Wingo, right? Like everybody was really focused on Wingo, and it felt like right after Raiola signed, and especially after Jaden Riddell signed, that Wingo would be next. Truthfully, like the impression that I've gotten is that Georgia looked at the kids that they already had committed and the kids that they still have a chance to get, and kind of felt like that they were good. I think that Georgia looks at Nitro Tuggle and believes that he is one of the that he should be a 5-star type of receiver, and they see him that way, and his ceiling is very high. And I think that Tuggle is a kid that if there's only so many wide receivers you can sign in this class, and I think they want to keep Tuggle is the point. And I think that if a Cam Coleman or a Mike Matthews or a Jeremiah Smith wanted to join Georgia's class at receiver, that they would be happy to have them. But other than that, I don't think they're really fishing or recruiting any other 2024 receivers right now. I think they're very happy with what they have at wide receiver. All right. Moving on from recruiting. Who do you see in the quarterback room this time next year? I see. That's a tough one. I think that the Carson Beck, probably the worst thing that could happen to Georgia, honestly, is that like Carson Beck has a good year, but not a good enough year to leave, which is totally on the table. I shouldn't say it's the worst thing that could happen, but I kind of feel like Carson Beck's either going to, be really good and have like an NFL type year, or he's not, and Georgia's maybe gonna like move on to somebody that give someone else a chance to do that maybe. So I feel like Georgia's kind of looking. I think they signed both Raiola and Puglisi. I don't think Gunnar Stockton's going anywhere. I think Beck leaves after this season because he has a good season. That's my take right now. I have good vibes on Beck. And then I think that Vandegrift leaves after next spring. I think he sticks around through the spring, competes for the job, but that someone else is, gets a leg up on him. I could be wrong. Love to see the light come on for Brack. We'll see what happens. Let's see what's going on in the chat here. Craig Lawson says Beck goes 20-2. I don't know what that means, Craig. He goes 11-1 twice? No. Oh, yeah, that doesn't make sense. Okay. Speaking of Carson Beck, a UGA record that Carson Beck could break this year. I've thought about this question a lot. It's kind of a tough question because there's just a lot of variables in it. I think there's this like really big misnomer that's going on right now where people are like, oh, well, Darnell Washington left and Georgia got a bunch of transfer portal receivers, so they're going to throw the ball more this year. And Carson Beck's going to air it out for 400 a game all through the month of September against easy opponents. He's going to throw the ball in September, but I bet you he throws the ball like 16, 18 times a game against, some of these teams that Georgia's got scheduled early on, some of these out-of-conference teams that they've got. Like, I don't personally see him throwing that much. Like, I think he could throw a good bit, but there's this like idea that Georgia's gonna all of a sudden start throwing the ball 40 times a game this year that I see on Twitter a lot. And personally, I just don't think that's correct. What do we know about Kirby Smart? He values possession of the football. He wants to score points, but he also wants to protect his defense. So he likes to limit the numbers of possessions in a game. And he likes to physically dominate you because Kirby Smart understands that football is played from the inside out. And that if you beat the shit out of somebody on the line of scrimmage, nothing else matters. The types of receivers they have do not matter. Types of defensive backs they have do not matter if you are bludgeoning them to death up front. And so that's what that like he's gonna treat the month of September like practice. And his practice reps are going to go to that, to dominating the line of scrimmage, if historical precedent holds. So, Carson's going to have some good numbers and it's going to be nice, but it's not going to be, I think, as crazy as everyone expects it to be. Stetson had 455 attempts in 15 games last year. That was the most pass attempts in a season. I will. Like, I don't think people realize some of the passing records. Like Eric Zier absolutely destroyed the record books back in the day when a lot of you guys, well, really when I was a kid, I was a young kid when it was going on. But I mean, Eric Zier threw for 544 yards against Southern Miss in 1993. I don't think Carson Beck is breaking that record. I think we could see him do. I think he's going to be efficient. Stetson's 2021 was 176.69. What was his 2022? 160.8. I think that's the one. Pass efficiency. I think it's passing efficiency. Stetson's passing efficiency in 2021 was 16 points higher than it was in 2022 because he wasn't throwing the ball as much. I think Georgia's going to throw the ball more than they did in 2021, but I think that's what they're going to do with Beck until somebody forces them not to, which is you're not going to see Carson Beck throwing the ball 35 times a game. You're going to see him have, I think, 18 of 24 or 21 of 26 type passing lines, stat lines. We'll see, though. I could be wrong. Maybe he goes and throws for 5,000 yards, and I'll look like an idiot, and somebody on Twitter will find this clip and embarrass me in January. I'd be fine with that. All right. Moving on. I see him being better than Fromm. That's what Corey Williams says about Beck. I don't disagree with that. I don't know that's saying a ton, but I mean, I agree with that. All right. Craig Lawson would like to know, what aspects of the game do you see Georgia improving on from last year, and where do you see regression? I see Georgia where I see Georgia improving the most is in their run game. And I know that they lose McIntosh out of the backfield, and that McIntosh was really good. But I think why you saw Georgia pass so much last year with Stetson, especially early in the season, and why he was putting up all those 300 plus yard games is that offensive line struggled to run block for a lot of the year. Uh, go back to that Kentucky game where Kirby, basically played like the man ball game of his dreams, and they just kind of beat the ball around and uh, ran it as much as they could and didn't throw it in the wind. And like some of that was like, yeah, it was a windy, cold day. A lot of that though was just like Georgia wasn't really threatened by Kentucky's offense, and they wanted the opportunity to play a game like that and like get some reps for that offensive line and run the football. Second half of the Chick-fil-A Bowl, Georgia's rushing attack was terrible. They had like 23 yards on 14 attempts before those final drives. And I mean, really, those last two drives were not. Yeah, those were all yards to the air off of Stetson's arm. Georgia didn't run the ball very well last year, like really until. I mean, yeah, they ran all over TCU, but it's kind of a different deal. And I think Georgia's offensive line this year is going to be really good. I think Amarius Mims is a monster. I think Ernest Green is going to be a monster at left tackle. I love Tate Ratledge, love Van Pran, and I think Xavier Truss is a solid player. He might not be quite as talented as those other four, but we've seen him have a lot of good football games in his career. So I think that's where you're going to see Georgia improve the most in terms of regression. I think it's be hard not to regress at defensive tackle. Like, there's a difference between them regressing and then that actually hurting them. But I think that Jalen Carter being gone, I mean, that's obviously hard to deal with. But I just think, like, you look at Georgia's roster, you look at the defensive tackles on Georgia's roster, and you see a whole lot of three technique guys, and you don't really see that like true nose, that zero tech. And Carter played three tech. I mean, Georgia didn't really play with the zero tech much last year, but it's like when you have freaking Jalen Carter, you don't have to because he demands a double team on every play. And what that does for the rest of your defensive line and the rest of your front seven schematically kind of is the same thing that a zero tech nose tackle would have done in terms of drawing double teams and creating opportunities for one-on-one matchups elsewhere across the line of scrimmage. So, yeah, I think that's the spot that I would be the most worried about. And it's not because Bear Alexander is gone, because Bear Alexander is, respectfully or unrespectfully, I don't really care, Bear Alexander is not a run-stopping D tackle. He's a big guy with some with above average ability to get off the ball and good wiggle and athleticism that allows him to be an effective pass rusher when he's on his game. But point being, yeah, like I don't think that's why. I just think that you go down the roster and you look at Georgia's defensive tackles. Let's just go through this exercise. Jordan Hall could be a dude. 6'6", 310. Absolutely could be a monster. Jamal Jarrett is the one that I think, like, if Georgia can get 15 to 20 snaps a game out of Jamal Jarrett, like, in SEC play, like in the big boy games, then this Georgia defense could be, like, it's hard to compare anything to the 2021 team, but like they could be just as effective statistically as that team was, because they're going to be an absolute nightmare to happen or to deal with if that happens. And Jared is able to occupy the middle of the line of scrimmage like that. Because the rest of these defensive tackles, Kristen Miller, 295, 6'4". Stackhouse is a monster against the run. I think he's a better pass rusher than a lot of us realize. You've got Walther back another year, but he's like 280. You got Ingram Dawkins, he's listed at 300, but he plays defensive end just as much as he plays defensive tackle. Logue, big, long guy, 6'5", super, super long, but like not a plugger in the middle. Brinson, phenomenal athlete. Again, more of that like 3-tech defensive tackle who like his strength is probably more as a pass rusher than as a run stopper. So point being, I think Georgia's going to be long on guys who can shoot the A gaps and the B gaps for that matter. As far as DTs, I just worry about them having that guy. Like we know what Stackhouse can do against the run, but it's just he's not. Georgia doesn't play any defensive linemen that much, and B, they need some other guys that are going to step up and like really be able to control those middle run lanes and ensure that Mondin and Dumas Johnson or whoever's back there at linebacker, especially with Mondin probably missing some time early in the year, ensure that those guys have clean lanes and the ability to like scrape into holes and make tackles at the line of scrimmage. Because the one thing we know about Kirby Smart is he's not going to tolerate being run on. So that is my answer. Last question. It's kind of a fun one. And if anyone in the chat wants to answer this in the chat, I'll be happy to read yours out loud. Blank player was the best position in the Kirby era. This is a Mad Lib from our friend Jimmy G, not Garoppolo. Which player basically was the best of his position in the Kirby era, and his incredible blank versus this team in 2023 proved it. So it's basically, is there a player on the 2023 team who I think is going to be the best of his position in the Kirby era? And then I get to have fun. I am going to say Amarius Mims was the best tackle in the Kirby era. And his incredible pancake block versus, this will be fun, LSU in the SEC championship game in 2023 proved it. I do think Amarius Mims is the most talented tackle that Georgia's had. Yes, I know they've had a lot of talented ones in the last 6-7 years since Kirby showed up, but I think he's a different level. I lied. Not the last question, because one of you in the chat had a question. Who do I think is the next man up if Mondin misses some games? CJ Allen, Walker, somebody else. This is something I never would have thought I would have said. Like, if you'd asked me this a year ago, or a little less than a year ago, like fall practice last year, I think it's Sorey. I think Xavier Sorey is that dude. It's hard. Like, there's so many inside linebackers. There was a point during spring practice where it was like EJ Lightsey might be the third inside linebacker on this team, and then it was like, oh shit, it's CJ Allen. Raylan Wilson is still a stud. There is so much ridiculous talent in that room that I expect them to, probably do some different things this year to put 3 linebackers on the field. But yeah, I think that I think it's Sorey. I think that he's just athletically, he's always been one of those guys that is built different, as the football bros say. And I just think that the light has kind of finally come on for him. You know, he spent his entire high school career playing on the ball, and it's hard to be an off-ball linebacker at Georgia and learn how to do all that. And I think it's finally clicked. So that is that. And then, don't want to leave anyone unsatisfied. Bradley Smith, I see your question. Let's go. Who is your prediction for most receiving from the wide receiver position this year? Dominic Lovett. I think Lovett's going to be the guy that has the most receiving yards of any receiver. Yeah, I think his ability to go into the slot and play outside at the Z, like I expect, I expect him to. Just all I heard all spring practice is like Dominic Lovett. All he does is wake up in the morning and create separation, and that's just. I think he's the guy. So, yeah, look forward to seeing that. Sorry again for starting this late. I'm always hesitant to tell you guys the time this is going to start because there's always like inevitably something that causes me to not start it on time. I'm making a commitment to all of you that I will be on time moving forward. Really appreciate all of you who watch this show, support DawgsCentral.com. Like, we continue to get more and more good feedback from folks on Dog Central. If I didn't honestly think we were doing something really cool and different and providing a value that like no one else is providing in the UGA media space, I wouldn't do it because trust me, there's enough echo chambers in this world. So if you haven't checked us out, we're still doing a launch special, $1 for 2 months of access. Like, you can basically try this thing out, get the experience. If you do it right now, because I'm going to take this down probably in the next 24 hours, but if you do it right now, it'll carry you through the first couple of weeks of fall practice. And I think our practice notes is an area where we really provide excellent value. So please check us out, DawgsCentral.com. And thank you again for all the support that you give us. Every like, every retweet, every everything, it counts and it goes a long way. So thank you guys for consuming what we do. Hope you have a good